It's dark. You can see the courtyard of a modern building, not far from which people are walking. Several people quickly run down the corridor. They approach the white door at the very end. A man in dark trousers and a jacket kicks down the door. Behind him are people in bulletproof vests, and in front are several people in white coats. Someone shouts that hunters have arrived, and among them is Hong Seok-yeon. One of the girls in a bulletproof vest stands near the room where behind the glass there are children in white shirts. She warns that there are children in the room. Someone hits the glass so hard that it cracks and the fragments fly to the sides. The girl asks the children if they are okay. Among them is a boy with dark hair wearing a white shirt who silently looks forward. A strong, dark man appears in front of them. He smiles brightly and says that the guys can go out. He takes the dark-haired boy into his arms as the child grabs his neck with his hands. The man asks the children if they are injured. A boy in a white shirt watches as people behind twist the hands of a man in a white robe, talking to each other about something. The child opens his eyes wide, raising his thin eyebrows. He sees a man lying in front of him, his face buried in the floor, and sweat rolling down his face. The boy thinks that he is begging for his life. A man in a dark uniform holds him in his arms while a girl nearby talks to a little girl and asks the dark-haired child his name. The boy looks thoughtfully at his interlocutor. The child hugs his savior tighter, introducing himself with a smile as number 12. The man lifts him up by his sides, peering into the boy's face. He asks about his name and then lowers the child to the floor. Suddenly his face changes and he angrily kicks the man in the robe lying on the floor. The man in the black uniform then grabs the culprit by the shirt and lifts him up for another blow to the face. The boy mentally associates this act with strength. He looks attentively at what is happening, watching as his savior's fist hits the man in the robe. The child thinks of an overwhelming force that no one can look down on. Someone calls Hong Seok-yeon. The dark man turns his face to the short-haired woman who points her finger at him and calls her inspector, asking what brings her here. The girl frowns in anger, ordering the man in the robe to be released, and says that she knew Hong Seok-yeon would start something like that. She folds her arms over her chest, watching as the man in the black uniform simply throws the man in the robe to the ground. The inspector says he appreciates Hong Seok-yeon's help, but he is making her life difficult by acting like this. A dark-haired boy appears next to the dark-skinned man. He asks if the girl is Hong Seok-yeon's boss. The inspector leans towards the child with a smile, answering his question negatively. She says that she is the one who scolds the dark man when he does something bad. The boy wonders if this is the essence of the authorities. He says that the head of the laboratory always scolds other employees, and that he also hates children. The short-haired girl and Hong Seok-yeon turn their heads towards the man in the robe lying on the floor. The inspector says he will definitely scold this bad man. A boy with dark hair raises his face to her in bewilderment. He says the girl looks weak. The child notices that she is not a hunter. A girl with a short haircut smiles pleasantly, closing her eyes. She says that she really isn't a hunter and isn't particularly strong. The inspector insists that she should not be judged by her appearance. The girl leans towards the child. Hong Seok-yeon stands behind, frowning. Inspector says there are many ways to scold a person other than beating. She hints that someone is well aware of this, meaning Hong Seok-yeon. The boy asks what he must do to become like her in the hunters. A girl with short hair affectionately strokes the child's head, fingering his hair. She says that the boy must study hard and pass the government exam, and after passing the exam, he must work hard to climb the corporate ladder. The main character says that the irresistible force of the hunter and the other force that controlled this hunter determined the path in his life. The action shifts to events 19 years later. A huge multi-story building can be seen in the middle of a modern city. The story takes place on May 31, 2044, at an ability management agency in Yeonggu, Seoul, South Korea. A guy with dark hair and a strict business suit holds a tablet in his hand. He says that Dungeon 2 in Yeongyungpo and Dungeon 1 in Mount Iwangsan have reached threat level 2 today. The main character is standing in front of the workers who are lazily sitting at their desks. He thinks that these people will never change. The man with dark hair's face darkens and his eyebrows furrow. He asks if they are going to listen to him. The main character notices that even if these are B and C ranked dungeons, the interior is unstable due to the increased threat level. The man calls out to his colleagues to wake up and listen so they don't get lost when they get into the dungeons. A guy in a suit stands in front of his colleagues, who straighten up and look interested. He says that Team 2 will be in charge of the B2 rank Yeongyungpo dungeon and then asks if there are any questions. A girl with her hair in a ponytail looks at the main character and says that everything is clear. The boss says that Team 1 can take the Tien dungeon, and Teams 3 and 4 are now resting because they recently went to the dungeon. The main character informs that another guild will take over the dungeon of Mount Iwangson. He puts his hand on the white laptop and says that the equipment is already prepared. He asks Team 2's leader to check everything is there before entering at 2 p.m. The guy with dark hair raises his hand, looking at his watch, and asks if they have any questions. A man with bangs falling to one side stretches his arms forward. The main character asks Team 2 to have lunch and be ready. People are leaving the office. Someone's massive boots with iron plaques are visible. The main character holds a tablet in his hands and looks at the man at the table with a smile. He addresses the girl as Eugene and asks what happened. A girl with her hair in a ponytail looks at her boss carefully and dissatisfied. She asks about the dungeon she was talking about. The main character clasps his hands on the tablet, turning his face towards the interlocutor. He asks if she is talking about being in Bangui Dawn. The guy with dark hair says that it was only a D6 ranked dungeon. The main character adds that they only send people on raids after the dungeons reach threat level 2. The girl says that she does not have a very good feeling about this. The main character turns his face and exhales heavily, looking to the side. He says that if they close the dungeon based only on her feelings, they would be bombarded with press. The man in the suit says that the girl should not abuse her powers just because she is an S-rank hunter. The girl with a ponytail frowns, clenching her hand into a fist with displeasure. She says that abuse of power is what the protagonist does. The man asks if she has ever seen a more capable and skilled child. Eugene rises from the table, grabbing his sword, and angrily looks at his colleague passing by. She says that she would have fired the main character long ago if he were not so good at his job. The man says that if a hunter attacks a government employee, it will be simply terrible for her. The girl with the ponytail lowers her head and frowns. She switches our serious tone and says that she really has a bad feeling. The main character appears outside the door. He smiles brightly, closing his eyes. The man says that he is very sorry, but he no longer has working hours. Eugene looks at him in shock. A shadow falls on her face. She shouts after the main character, calling him Wu Hui. The action moves to 2 days later to Busan. You can see the beach and azure sea waves near the city. Someone asks about the watch that was on the news. 2 girls, one with dark hair and the other with blonde hair, look at the watch on Wu Hui's hand. He smiles pleasantly, closing his eyes, and says that this is a masterpiece created by the government and the SK Research Laboratory. The man says that they are still in the testing stage, so there are only 2 of them in the world. The girl with blonde hair says that the main character must be an excellent hunter. Wu Hui and his companions are sitting at a table for 4 in a restaurant, having dinner. The main character says that he has a license, but he is not a hunter. Wu Hui explains that he works for an ability management agency that helps hunters navigate dungeons more easily. He also adds that he is a direct subordinate to the agency director. A girl with blonde hair raises her hand, smiling enthusiastically. She understands who the main character is talking about. She talks about Hong Seok-yeon, the best hunter in their country. A large figure of a man in a black jacket can be seen, with a spear behind his back. The main character admits that he is his son. A girl with dark hair asks if Hong Seok-yeon is his father. Wu Hui takes a glass of wine in his hand with a smile and notices that he is the hunter's adopted son. A man with dark hair tilts his glass, looking down thoughtfully. He explains that as a child he had an accident and lost his parents, and the director of the agency saved him and adopted him. The main character remembers how he was a little boy and stood in the kitchen with Hong Seok-yeon, who was throwing scrambled eggs in a frying pan. Wu Hui says he worked hard to repay this debt and now works for his adoptive father. Mentally, the main character notices that this is not a complete lie. Wu Hui smiles widely as he raises his glass. He asks the girls not to think as if he got the position just like that. The main character speaks that he worked hard for her. The girls say that Hong Seok-yeon is known for being fair and honest. In his mind, Wu Hui notices that this is a lie. He takes a sip of his wine, looking up with a smile. The girls admire that father and son are working together. The main character says that he is not 100% son, but simply used the fact that he has a hunter's license to his advantage. A girl with dark hair stretches her hand forward and asks with a smile why the main character came here. He puts his empty glass aside and says that he is on vacation and celebrating his promotion. Wu Hui explains that he didn't plan to come, but he was kicked out because he never takes days off. The girl with dark hair laughs, folds her arms and says that it is not good to work all the time, and also says that they are also on vacation. The main character asks if he is bothering them. 2 people are sitting at the bar. One bartender is wiping a glass while the second is preparing a drink. The girls tell Wu Hui that he showed them something cool, and then ask to see it again. The main character stretches his thin arm forward. His watch glitters in the light. The girls ask what the object on his hand is called. Wu Hui says that this is an exclusive miniature multi-module hunter communication device, simply called a Mana clock. The girls tilt their heads towards the watch while the main character shows it off with a smile. A girl with a bow on her head asks how to use this watch. The main character explains that the device recognizes mana patterns, so only the owner can use it. He asks the girls to wait to show the clock in action. Blue bars light up on the device. The clock shows a blue system window, where the threat level of each dungeon is described. The girls look at the watch with delight. The one with dark hair raises her eyebrows as she notices that the threat level of one of the dungeons suddenly increases. The system window shows that the rank a dungeon in Bangi Dawn reaches threat level 3 and is highlighted in red. The clock lights up with a red glow. The system window informs about a rank D dungeon in Bangi Dawn, located in Seoul. A girl with blonde hair picks up the phone, watching the news on the internet informing about the destruction of the dungeon. The main character picks up his phone, accepting an incoming call. Someone on the other side of the phone says this is very bad news. Wu Hui moves the phone away from his ear, covering it with his hand, and asks if this is happening in the Bangi Dong dungeon. The girls are watching live news on the internet at this moment. The main character says that he doesn't think anything bad will happen since it's a D-rank dungeon, but there might be a large concentration of people in that area. The interlocutor interrupts Wu Hui, claiming that this is not a D-rank dungeon at all. Half of the Songpa district was destroyed as soon as it appeared. The main character looks ahead in horror, his pupils narrow. The person on the other side of the phone states that the agency's directors are now on the road with the hunters who are on standby. The main character asks them to calm down and send a helicopter. His interlocutor begs him to hurry up. A helicopter flies in the dark sky, flashing red and blue lights. Wu Hui thinks about how terrible it is that half the entire area has already disappeared. He says that everything should be in order by his arrival, since the director of the agency is there. Wu Hui rests his chin on his palm while sitting in the helicopter, thinking about how he came a long way for a vacation. The main character carefully looks at the Mana clock and mentally asks why the device is turning off. The pilot in front of him starts to get nervous and talks about some things below them. Huge monsters appear. One of them has a large eye. The other looks like a green insect. The pilot says in horror that these are monsters. 2044, 2nd of June. The main character looks in horror at the red system window, which warns of many dungeons lighting up in red. All the country's dungeons were destroyed. You can see a destroyed city, debris from the road and buildings, and a helicopter flies directly over the growing fire. News reports that the phenomenon of dungeon destruction is happening not only in South Korea, but all over the world, and the status of the hunters who went on raids with Hunter Hong Seok-yeon has not yet been confirmed. The main character says that they still won't be able to return to Busan. He invites the pilot to look around to see if there are any survivors here, since there were no flying monsters on their way. Wu Hui says they will find survivors and go to the Ability Management Agency. The main character pushes a wolf with red eyes aside. He plunges the blade straight into the monster's body. The corpses of wolves and people, a bunch of broken cars and a fire are visible everywhere. Wu Hui pokes his trembling, bruised hands at the system window, begging it to open. There is an inscription on it stating that the agency director Hong Seok-yeon has a connected device. The system window changes to another one that warns that the director's vital signs cannot be tracked. The main character looks ahead in horror. Dirt from the battles is visible on his face. He thinks that Hong Seok-yeon, the most powerful hunter in South Korea, may be dead. The main character says that the future he wanted was simple. Dump all the annoying things on others and live harmlessly. The main character wanders through the destroyed city aimlessly. He says that to achieve this, he struggled a lot and was close to the goal. A guy walks through the streets on fire. Wu Hui says he needs someone to support him, so he must find survivors. The main character turns his head sharply in the direction of someone coughing. He notices a girl lying on the rubble with her hair in a ponytail, her side covered in blood. He addresses her as his aunt. She asks him with a smile not to call him her aunt. The main character says that it doesn't matter now since she is in serious condition. Wu Hui kneels in front of the woman and asks if she knows what happened. Eugene says that all he knows is that the centipede that came out of the Bangi Dong dungeon caused this. The main character opens the green bottle, removing the stopper. Eugene looks pitifully at Wu Hui, breathing heavily, and asks what this expensive potion will do. The girl says that she is infected with centipede venom, so the medicine will not work. The main character says that he will pour the potion until it works. In desperation, he pours the green liquid onto the wound. It forms foam. Eugene chides Wu Hui, noting that she talked about the need to raid the dungeon. She asks how the main character dared to ignore the hunter's instincts. The main character says that there is nothing less reliable than the instincts of a hunter. Eugene holds his side with his hand while lying on the ground. She says she will die anyway. The girl holds out a metal pendant in her bloody hand. She asks to take it because it belonged to someone important, but Eugene won't reveal who. The main character takes the token in his hand and sees the name Hong Seok-yeon engraved. She says that Wu Hui already knew what happened to his adoptive father anyway. The girl with a pitiful smile says that she took it just in case, but is glad that she took the token after all. The main character asks what is there to be happy about. Yu Jae-yeon states that he is Hong Seok-yeon's son, so he should have the token. The buildings around were destroyed, cars were crushed, and there were heaps of garbage and debris everywhere. Wu Hui says he's not even his real son. Yu Jae-yeon points out that the main character is Hong Seok-yeon's only son, so he should at least give him a proper funeral. The main character says that he will not give the girl a funeral, so she should not die in the hands of Wu Hui. The guy with dark hair desperately clutches the token in his hand and asks Eugene not to die. The girl holds her wound with trembling hands. She says she can't control it and that she's lucky to have lived this long at all. Eugene raises his head up, looking wearily to the side. She calls Wu Hui. The girl remembers being a schoolgirl. She was holding the hand of a little boy with dark hair, wearing a white sweater with a cat. Eugene asks if the main character remembers how he followed her around and called her his big sister. Wu Hui asks why she is remembering this now. The girl says that the main character used to be sweet, but now that he has grown up a little, he has become very rude. Eugene turns her face to the guy who sits on his knees in front of her. She tries to draw his attention to something, but he doesn't listen and keeps talking about the potion. The main character bows his head over his girlfriend, resting his hands on the ground. Eugene says that her sword is lying to the side. Wu Hui doesn't listen to her and says he will call her big sister again. The girl interrupts him and says that she knows that Wu Hui is learning to use a spear thanks to the master, but he still has to take her sword. The girl smiles pitifully, showing a row of strong teeth, and there are tears in her eyes. Eugene asks the main character to survive. She freezes on the ground. Wu Hui sits silently on his knees in front of her. He carefully covers the girl's eyes with his hand. The main character rises from the ground, leaning on his knees. He wonders how he can survive in a world that has already been destroyed. Hong Seok-yeon takes up her friend's sword, left on the road. He admits that he hates it all. He gets to the Ability Management Agency. A huge centipede with red legs crawls along a city street. The main character says that this is quite expected. He wanders past the corpses, moving closer to the monster's body and dragging the sword behind him. Wu Hui thinks that being a hunter is a job that won't even leave a corpse. He wonders if so many hunters really died trying to kill one centipede. The protagonist's face darkens as he moves towards the creature. He thinks how the most powerful hunter could die, leaving behind nothing but a tag. Wu Hui thinks about what to do now and sees one option: to continue looking for survivors. But he doesn't understand what will happen if he finds them. The main character takes up the sword, which becomes covered with blue energy. He asks if there are any survivors at all. The guy raises his weapon up, swinging with force to strike. He unleashes a stream of energy directly at the monster. The creature's body disappears, leaving behind a ghostly golden trail. The main character looks ahead in horror and surprise. His pupils narrow. He wonders where the centipede's corpse went. A device appears in front of Wu Hui, from which a thin column of light emanates. The main character takes the device in his hands. Some numbers light up on it. The guy wonders if it fell out of the centipede. He says he's never heard of monsters dropping things before. The main character picks up the device. 8 zeros are visible on it. He asks what kind of watch this is. The device reports that verification is in progress. It then warns that the authorization procedure has been delayed. The watch reports that it is initiating an emergency procedure. Some golden numbers light up on the scoreboard. The main character asks what this item is. The device asks if Wu Hui wants to set a date. Golden zeros are visible. A guy with dark hair holds a watch in one hand, his eyebrows furrowed. He asks what they are muttering about. The numbers on the dial begin to rotate. The watch tells you to return and initiates the automatic sequence. They ask if Wu Hui wants to do it. The main character tilts his head towards the clock screen, noticing that some time ago it asked to set a date, but now it is asking for something to be done. Wu Hui carefully watches the dimmed screen and asks the clock what it wants from him. The watch starts flashing red and alerts you to danger. A long shadow appears above the main character. Pieces of tiles rise into the air. Wu Hwie wonders if it's a centipede, but realizes it's not one. He muses that the centipede from before didn't have such overwhelming energy. The thought creeps into Wu Hwie's mind that it was this creature that turned South Korea into ruins. A huge red clawed paw is visible. The watch warns that the probability of survival is 0%. The main character turns his face over his shoulder and looks at the monster in horror. He says that he doesn't care what kind of creature it is, and that if he can survive, he will do it right now. The device notifies that the identity has been confirmed. It launches an emergency protocol. A huge red dragon-like monster bares its fangs. The device goes crazy, activating strange protocols. The main character sees the yellow predatory eyes of the monster. He thinks about running away if at all possible. The device says it will initiate the final sequence and then notifies that qualification has been verified. The main character thinks that it is impossible to escape from this monster. The device reports that the world is subject to destruction. Wu Hwie opens his mouth wide in horror and screams at the clock, begging them to get him out of here alive. The clock names the main character as the last survivor. The device says it is moving Wu Hwie to a random time. Someone hits the main character on the cheek. He intercepts his hand. Several young men in uniform with blue ties sit in front of him. The girl with blonde hair asks for forgiveness and says that they had to bring him back to consciousness because he was not answering them. She adds that they have cured him, but ask him not to rush. Wu Hwie leans on the floor and raises his body. He looks around in surprise. The girl with blonde hair asks if he is a hunter. She draws this conclusion based on the fact that the main character has a sword with him. Wu Hwie turns his gaze to the side, watching some people in the room. He is surprised that the world was not destroyed and asks where he is. Wu Hwie notices the blonde-haired girl's clothes and her name tag, Yu Haiyun. The main character wonders where the students got the old Hunter Academy uniform. Wu Hwie is asked if he is okay and if he is shell-shocked. Yu Haiyun says that in that case, she won't be able to cure him with her own powers. The main character looks at the computer standing on the table near the wall with a calendar and calls it ancient. He looks at the date in surprise, his pupils constricting. Wu Hwie realizes that the year is 2024. A guy with a short haircut and a loose tie pushes a guy with glasses, wrenching his elbow from his grip. The bully's name is Hyunwook. Hearing this name, the main character turns his head, looking at the guy in surprise. Hyunwook approaches Wu Hwie and points his finger at him, saying that they didn't have time to wait for the main character to fully come to his senses. He folds his arms over his chest and disgruntledly begins to reproach Wu Hwie. A guy with dark hair stands up, leaning on the table, and tries to walk forward. He lowers his face, frowning and vaguely understanding what is happening. The main character wonders why, out of all time, he was brought here. Set on April 5, 2024 in Myeongdong, Seoul. In the middle of the street stands a herd of black buffaloes with red eyes. Of the 46 people in this building, only 5 will survive. The main character stands at the window, carefully observing what is happening outside. He remembers what happened before he lost consciousness. He sees Yu Jiyoung and other corpses on the ground, then remembers the device that was formed after the centipede disappeared. The main character realizes that he has returned to the past. The man grabs his hair, frowning. He recalls that he published a paper on dungeon crawling when he was at university, and he knows it well. Wu Hwie talks about what happened right before the development of the magic measuring device, when dungeons were controlled manually. A huge portal can be seen in the middle of the city road. Since the dungeon was located in the center of Seoul, it was well managed. The main character admits that dungeons are unpredictable. He says that what looked calm yesterday may collapse today. The Management Guild, which did not want to miss out on an amazing S-ranked dungeon and had mistakenly reported that it was a B rank, only received news of the breakthrough after the first wave of victims and was late in taking action. The city is seen in rubble, with cracks in the buildings. The office is a mess, there is blood everywhere. The high school students nearby who were training to become hunters tried to protect the civilians, but the students who had just awakened the power couldn't figure out how to deal with the dungeon breach. Only 2 students and 3 civilians survived. A group of students is visible, everyone's faces except Hyunwook, and the girl with dark hair are painted black. This incident was a setback for the newly established hunter cultivation school, but at the same time served as the impetus for the creation of numerous laws related to hunters. The main character leans his hands on the windowsill and looks back over his shoulder. He thinks that since he has Yu Jae-yeon's sword, he is confident that he can get out of the situation. Wu Hwie puts his hand in his pocket and in his other palm he clutches a sword. A guy with dark hair addresses the students, wondering how much time has passed since the dungeon was broken. The main character says that they are high school hunters and should have learned something about dungeon crawling. The girl with short blonde hair looks at him, puzzled, with her hand pressed to her chest. She says they came here today to inquire about them. Wu Hui stands in front of the students and says that they need to start studying them right now. He asks again when the dungeon break occurred. The girl with dark hair puts her finger to her face and says it happened about 4 hours ago. Wu Hui says that when it comes to dungeons, you need to use accurate numbers. The girl with blonde hair raises her hand and frowns. She says 3 hours and 50 minutes have passed. The main character asks if they contacted anyone outside. The girl replies that they lost contact 2 hours ago, and the last news they heard was that the hunters were going to attack the boss. Wu Hui looks down thoughtfully, the dust stain from the battle still visible on his face. He thinks that the agency director was on this team and blames himself for only attacking the boss without noticing that his students were dying. The main character convinces himself that this will not happen this time. Hyunwook points his finger at Wu Hui and annoyedly asks who he is. The girl with dark hair tries to stop him. The guy with the short hair tenses his hand, frowning, and asks his comrades how they can trust a man they don't even know. Hyunwook asks Wu Hui for a hunter's license. The main character says that he lost her, and the guy with short hair looks at him in bewilderment. Wu Hui thinks that the license is actually in his wallet, but he can't get it because it says 2031. The main character looks at the guy slightly from above, pursing his lips. He muses that now that he thinks about it, he doesn't have any work ID, and even if he gets out of this situation, he won't be able to check the dungeon. Wu Hui picks up the sword, exhaling slightly, and asks if he just needs to prove that he is a hunter. The main character swings his sword, leaving a blue streak in the air. One of the students declares that he will believe that Wu Hui is a hunter. A guy in a yellow sweatshirt and a girl with long hair are watching students behind the glass. The guy wonders if this means they can escape. The girl replies that she doesn't know, but it's better than being alone. The guy in a school uniform with short hair and wide open eyes sits down on a chair. The girl and guy discuss him, saying that this is the treasured son of the Daeung group, who must come and save. His name is Lee Seong-yeon. He is the youngest child of Daeung, one of the world's largest conglomerates. A girl with blonde hair asks the main character in surprise if he has a plan on how to survive. Lee Seong-yeon sits contentedly in the back. Daeung valued Lee Seong-yeon so much that after his death they helped run a hunter school, founded an ability management agency, and promoted their father to director of the agency. The main character looks thoughtfully over the girl's back at Daeung's successor. He thinks what would have happened if this guy had survived. Wu Hui reasons that if he has no personality and even if he is a little suspicious, he can become a hero that no one can criticize. The main character's face breaks into a soft smile. He says that he has a plan and needs to go to the mayor's office. The main character says that he will weaken Lee Seong-yeon's runes and create a scenario in which he saved him from danger. A gray-haired man with a cap on his head bursts into the office. He shouts that the city hall is very far from here. The main character smiles awkwardly. A vein appears on his cheek. He asks to look here. Wu Hui mentally reasons that he wants to experience what he only saw in the recording. He says testimony from survivors said the man with the cap didn't listen to the students because they were young. The main character asks a man in a blue jumper if he wants to die. He angrily points his finger at Wu Hui and asks how the hunter can threaten him. The guy with dark hair asks him to shut up. The main character stands in front of the students and says that it was not easy for him to save himself, but he cannot abandon his children, so he wants to help. The girl with blonde hair resolutely clenches her hand into a fist. Wu Hui asks if the students want to leave on their own, because in that case he won't stop them. The girl with the short hair turns to the guy with glasses, who nods at her words that they cannot leave people. The main character grabs a large piece of paper and a pen, leaning over the table, and says that because of the students, he is trying to save everyone, even those like the old man in the cap. Wu Hui invites him to stay if he doesn't agree. The main character says he needs a map and then asks if anyone knows the Myeongdong area well. A girl in a light jacket pats the old man on the shoulder, appearing behind him. She says she can draw a map of the area pretty well. Wu Hui unfolds a long sheet of paper. He draws a point on the map where the green polygon is indicated. The guy with dark hair says they are here and then leads a line to the dungeon. Wu Hui explains that since the raid on the boss began 2 hours ago, the Minotaur should have already been driven onto the mountain. The students stand behind a guy with dark hair who, with his arms spread wide, is trying to draw a map. Someone is shouting about the Minotaur being an S-rank monster. A girl with short hair asks about him being so close. The main character explains that the buffaloes probably followed the boss to Mount Namsen, so only those monsters that separated from the herd should remain on the road. He circles part of the territory and asks what it is. A girl with short hair raises her hand and says that this is the outer part of the blockade. She recounts saying that a line of defense will be established to prevent the monsters from spreading to other places. The main character says that since the city hall station is the headquarters, they just need to get close to it, and then they will definitely survive. Some man behind the main character asks if they should just sit still. He assumes a scenario where the boss will be defeated and the dungeon break will end. Wu Hui turns his head towards him and says that the Minotaur is a dictator. He explains that if the Minotaur says to gather, then the monsters will gather, and if he tells them to hunt, then they will hunt. The same goes for food. A crowd of buffaloes is visible near the window, their eyes glowing red. Someone asks what hungry monsters will do if their boss disappears. The creatures have a good sense of smell. The main character asks if there are any other differences with the plan. The old man, the man in the suit, Hyunwook and Daeung's successor silently look at Wu Hui. A guy with dark hair smiles pleasantly and asks if there are any magicians who can draw runes. One of the students touches Lee Sun-yeon's forehead, drawing a blue mark. Two students carefully draw marks on their foreheads. The main character looks from the side and says that monsters are sensitive to mana and target them, so the runes need to be drawn properly. The dark-haired girl looks up at her rune. She wonders if it really hides mana and says she's never heard of such a thing. The girl draws a sign on Wu Hui's forehead as he leans towards her. The main character thinks that if we compare this sign with the runes of past years, then this is a completely reasonable reaction. The guy with dark hair explains that when the mark is on the forehead, it hides the mana associated with them, but it does not hide the magic that was cast. Wu Hui rises to his full height, addressing the students. He asks if they know how to activate the runes. He touches the rune on the forehead of one student with his hand and says that he needs to fill his hand with mana and put his finger on the rune. The main character asks to activate the rune when he moves away. Wu Hui mentally notes that for Lee Sun-yeon, he will make his mana weaker. A guy with dark hair sits on the windowsill, grabbing the window frame. He says that he will release his mana and lure the monsters in a circle, and when he passes by again, the students will start running. Wu Hui says that he will send the monsters away and catch up with the guys. The main character jumps down into a crowd of huge buffaloes. He lands on the ground, creating a blue flash of light below him. The monsters start running after Wu Hui. The main character says he has to wear a red cape or something to get attention. The students go outside. A girl with dark hair walks next to Hyunwook. She wonders who the main character is. Hyunwook is surprised and asks why she is worrying about this now. A guy with glasses comes up next to them and says in surprise that Wu Hui knew about the dungeon boss. He asks if the main character is a hunter who came here on a raid. The girl with dark hair says that it is possible, since he knew a lot of specific information. A girl with short blonde hair raises her hand and frowns thoughtfully. She says that the main character could have gotten hurt while leading the boss up the mountain. Lee Seong-yeon notices that Wu Hui is too weak if he fainted. A guy with short hair touches his head with his hand, looking thoughtfully to the side. He says that the only thing they can do now is to trust the main character, because he managed to drive away the monsters in front of the building. An old man in a cap approaches the students. They ask if the preparation is over. The man with gray hair says he will run as fast as he can and asks the children to be careful. Hyunwook and the dark-haired girl smile happily as they discuss how they will have to work hard to survive. A guy with glasses takes his friend by the shoulder and points to something. He sees Wu Hui running down the road not far away. Following the guy with dark hair, nothing is visible except the city street. A crowd of buffaloes suddenly appears, rushing after the main character. Wu Hui slashes his sword, cutting through the air, creating a blue stream of energy. He finds himself surrounded by monsters, whom he looks at from the outside. Hyunwook waves his hand, beckoning the rest of the students to follow him. The main character sees students, surrounded by a blue glow, running forward. He mentally asks the magicians to create a shield on both sides, and if there are stragglers, then block them with shields, and Hyunwook will take care of them. The civilians should follow. A girl with short hair and Lee Sun-yeon are shown, with a guy in a yellow sweatshirt in front. The main character says that the healer and swordsman should be in the back. They must pick up those who have fallen and take care of them. A huge buffalo with a ring in its nose appears next to Lee Sun-yeon. A trail of red light from the monster's eyes and a spark are visible. The main character kicks the creature in the face. He turns his face to the students, mouth wide open, and shouts at them to run. Lee Seong-yeon looks at us at Woo Hui in horror, a faint shadow falling on his face. Woo Hui slightly closes his eyelids with a pitiful expression on his face. A crowd of buffaloes throw their heads up, revealing their horns. The main character stands on the balcony, leaning his hand on the windowsill. He watches the buffaloes walking along the streets. Woo Hui wonders where they come from. The main character raises his hand, wiping sweat from his face. He says it took a lot of work for him to get out of there. The guy says he understands that he was the one who collected them. Woo Hui explains that he drained the mana on purpose to collect the monsters. He is seen swinging his sword, creating a stream of blue energy. Woo Hui then remembers drawing a rune on Lee Seong-yeon's forehead. He says he lightly erased the mana rune on his successor's forehead to put him in danger. Woo Hui's eye shines blue. Before Lee Seong-yeon is attacked by the monsters that the main character lured with his mana, he will stage a sacrifice scene and a new hero will be born. Woo Hui lowers his face, slightly worse for wear from the battle. The main character says that in the end no one died and everything went fine, so everything is fine. Woo Hui imagines a scene from the movie where he stands with another man wearing glasses and they look at their watch. The main character thinks that if he really traveled in time, then 10-year-old Woo Hui is also here somewhere. The guy hopes that he will not repeat the plot of the film, where, by changing the past, you can erase yourself from history. Buffaloes wander around the city while the protagonist looks down on them. He thinks that the suspicious item also said that this world is guaranteed to be doomed to the apocalypse. Woo Hui thinks it must be related to the Banggi-dong dungeon. The main character jerks his head up, remembering this dungeon. He touches his hand to the watch, from which there are blue rings. The guy wonders what's wrong with his mana clock, since it still works as long as he supplies it with mana. The main character types with his fingers on a virtual keyboard. He looks at the blue system window that pops up and smiles awkwardly. The main character understands why he was transported to today. The system window says, Seoul, Songpa District, Banggi-dong Dungeon Rank D6, Incident April 6, 2024. The main character says that there was a reason for this. The device ordered him to change the fate of this world. The main character lowers his hand with his watch, and a curse is heard not far from him. Several people in black uniforms are running away from a huge buffalo with a sledgehammer. The hunters wonder why the monsters have gone berserk. One of the creatures exhales air through large nostrils. The main character watches what is happening from the roof of the building, leaning slightly forward. He says that these people must be hunters from Namsan. The guy says that there is no need to interfere since the boss was already defeated by this team. In addition, there is an agency director. Hong Seok-yeon appears with a spear in his hand, grinning and running towards the monsters. Someone shouts that they are attacking their subordinates by not recognizing them. The Dark Man says that all the better for them, because thanks to this, the small monsters fled, so they need to focus on tying up the boss first. One of the buffaloes hits the road with its hoof, pieces of asphalt fly to the sides. The main character says that the legendary Korean hunters of modern history have gathered here. Suddenly the monster's hoof is bound by a tree vine. The main character looks up in surprise. He says that this is the unique magic of the archmage Kim Ki-man. A girl with long hair furrows her eyebrows and bites her lips while controlling a tree vine. Woo Hui says that after the death of the huntress, such magic was completely lost, so for him it is a big part of seeing the magic with his own eyes. The main character wonders how Kim Ki-man could die. He says that if he could save the life of such a significant figure, she would certainly help him. The danger level of the Banggi-dong dungeon has not changed for 20 years. 2S rank hunters would not be able to cope, considering that such a monster was hiding inside the stable dungeon. Hong Seok-yeon jumps on the buffalo, striking at it. The future can change if the protagonist can save those who were originally destined to die, such as the students of the modeling school. First, Woo Hui needs to close the dungeon where the one who destroyed Seoul is hiding. The main character puts his hand on his chin, smiling thoughtfully. He reasons that if he saves people and adds to their debt, this will provide him with a comfortable old age. A hunter with combed hair strikes a spear directly at the buffalo's hoof. A girl with blue eyes puts her staff forward and summons the vines of death. The buffalo, covered in vines on all sides and wounded in the leg, screams as the glow leaves Kim Ki-man's staff. The monster's hoof gives way and blood sprays out. The buffalo clenches its teeth, revealing its fangs, and rushes forward ferociously, clutching a piece of concrete in its hand. He grabs onto piles of collapsed asphalt. The monster lunges forward, slamming its hammer into the road. The main character looks attentively from the side, scratching his head, and thinks that it's time to go to the mayor's office. Kim Ki-man stands next to the monster and asks Hong Seok-yeon to cut off his other remaining leg. The hunter throws himself under the buffalo. The girl raises her arms, surrounding the entire body of the animal with a new vine, which is held back by Hong Seok-yeon's hands. The muscles on the body of some creature tense. The spear pierces directly into the monster's body. The vines quickly spread to the sides. Someone hiding behind the monster's body waves his hand and says that his work is completed. He asks the hunters not to pay attention to him. Hong Seok-yeon and Kim Ki-man look at the man in front of them in shock, wondering who it is. The main character is shown behind the defeated buffalo. He raises his hand to his neck, looking to the side. Woo Hui claims that he is just a passerby. In the office, the main character and Hong Seok-yeon are sitting behind glass, with an employee in a blue uniform standing nearby. He asks the boss if he is sure he wants to interrogate Woo Hui alone. The employee says the gun was confiscated. Hong Seok-yeon smiles, showing his strong teeth, while the guy in the blue uniform and cap says that this suspicious man has no social security number, no wake-up number, no fingerprints. Hong Seok-yeon says that everything is fine and that he has something to ask. The employee asks him to be careful. The main character sits motionless at the table in handcuffs, directly looking at his adoptive father. They sit opposite each other and are silent. Hong Seok-yeon puts his hands on his chest. He smiles widely, closing his eyes and frowning. Hong Seok-yeon says he turned off the camera while they were walking here so he and the main character can just talk. The dark man suggests starting with a name. He introduces himself. The main character carefully watches the man in front of him, raising his eyebrows. Woo Hui says that seeing the young agency director felt like going back in time. The guy with dark hair wonders if this agency director will save little Woo Hui in a year and adopt him after 2 years. The main character places his handcuffed hands on the table and says his name. The man holds out a drawing with a torn edge with his strong hand. He asks if Woo Hui knows what it is. The main character looks in surprise at something that resembles an inverted ship with a cross instead of a mast. He says that this drawing covered the wall of the laboratory. The main character flinches when Hong Seok-yeon notices his reaction and smiles. The dark man folds his hands on his strong chest and asks Woo Hui not to be nervous, but just to talk. He claims that they were very worried about the main character. He points at himself in bewilderment and wonders why Hong Seok-yeon knows him. The hunter nods gloomily, closing his eyes. He says that if everything had gone according to plan, they would have met in a better situation. Hong Seok-yeon is happy that the main character came out unharmed exactly as he heard, with the help of blue mana, fire, and a sword. The main character replies that he doesn't quite understand what Hong Seok-yeon is talking about. A dark man grabs a piece of paper with a drawing. He says that he is the same teacher that Kim was talking about. Woo Hui thinks the man is mistaking him for an informant from Bangju. Hong Seok-yeon looks at the drawing on the paper and says that he was worried because they lost contact with the informant after what happened to Kim. The main character explains that, apparently, the insider, whom the agency director was supposed to contact, also died along with Kim. Woo Hui watches his interlocutor with his hands in front of him. Hong Seok-yeon says that they agreed to help with the escape. The dark man admits that he wants to catch these guys just like the main character. Hong Seok-yeon says that he has already prepared a personality for him from this side. Woo Hui leans his head forward and closes his eyes. Hong Seok-yeon says that they are too busy dealing with the incident in Myeongdong to pay attention to the hunter who suddenly appeared. The man admits that he only knows that the main character's last name is Woo, so he gave him a temporary name. Woo Hui says that this is very fortunate, and that this fact explains why his biography is unclear. The main character thinks that there is no need to rush, since he knows that the agency director does not really trust him yet, and there are some doubts. Hong Seok-yeon asks if he should call the main character Woo Hui. The guy with dark hair raises his head and looks straight ahead, giving an affirmative answer. The main character reasons that he is also from Bangju and that he is an insider, so it is not a lie and there is no risk of exposure. Woo Hui sits at a great distance from the man, who folds his arms across his chest. Hong Seok-yeon says that the guy will work under him for some time. The main character clarifies that this is necessary for surveillance. The director says that he can think so, and also that he cannot afford to let Woo Hui go freely. Hong Seok-yeon extends his hand to the dark-haired guy and says that he's looking forward to working with him. The main character looks at the dark man. He smiles pleasantly and extends his hand. Woo Hui says she started working for Hong Seok-yeon again. He adds that he is not actually the director of the agency or his adoptive father. The main character shakes the man's hand and says that he is glad too. A week passes. The main character is dressed in a blue tracksuit. A shadow falls on his face. Opposite him at the table sits Hong Seok-yeon. He holds out some kind of folder with documents. A hunter with brown hair asks how the guy is doing and if everything is okay with him being here. The main character asks how he can be okay if he's stuck in a place like this for a whole week. Hong Seok-young smiles and laughs widely, claiming that he visits him every day and that it must be great. Woo Hui points his finger at his ankle and says displeasedly that he is being treated like a prisoner, and this thing is essentially his handcuffs. Hong Seok-young shows his teeth in a smile and says that you shouldn't be so negative, but try to see something good. The man reminds that Woo Hui managed to escape and is now free. The main character told him that he wants to achieve a lot. The main character looks at Hong Seok-young, who folds his arms across his chest and says that he is the one who wants to do a lot of things. The dark man asks to be called not Mr., but Uncle or something like that. He asks if the protagonist remembers the 5 children he saved in Myeongdong. Woo Hui nods affirmatively, looking carefully at his interlocutor. A man with combed hair sits motionless at the table and says that these are his students. The main character thinks he shouldn't have found out about them just now and wonders if he passed the test. Hong Seok-young smiles widely, his face tense, and says that he heard that it was the main character who lured away the minotaurs. The man says that thanks to Woo Hui, they easily dealt with the buffaloes, otherwise the damage would have been much more serious. The main character carefully and silently observes his interlocutor. Woo Hui wonders if Hong Seok-young explains what happened. The man says he was wondering where all the buffalo came from, but the main thing is that the result was good and the children were fine. Hong Seok-young thanks the main character. He shrugs and smiles contentedly, closing his eyes. Hong Seok-young leans forward slightly, resting his hand on the table. He says he's been thinking about something. The main character mentally notes that the results of his thoughts have never been good. Hong Seok-young looks straight into Woo Hui's face, rubbing his chin with his hand. He says that he knows the skill level of his students better than anyone and that it would be difficult even if it was only them. But the main character also saved civilians. The director concludes that everyone would be dead if not for Woo Hui. The man takes something out of a white envelope. He says his students cried and begged to find the main character. Since Hong Seok-young felt the need to repay the guy for what he did, he decided to think a little. The main character wonders why the man thinks so much. Hong Seok-young places a piece of paper on the table in front of Woo Hui and asks him to teach the students. The dark man's gaze becomes stern. He carefully looks at Woo Hui with golden eyes. He says that the main character will be too noticeable if he goes through the dungeons with him, but if he works as a teacher, it will be a good cover. The guy bends over the paper, looking down. He asks about Hong Seok-young's intention to teach children. Just by looking at the director of the agency, you can understand how deep the connection between student and master is. There are several people, including Yu Jiyoung, from the Hunter School who consider the agency director to be their teacher. The main character believes that they would have done a great job on their own, but they voluntarily came to the agency to be on a leash. The landscape of the city is visible. Cars drive along the road in front of a large glass building. The main character assumes that if he establishes good relationships with his students, they will provide him with a future after saving the world. Woo Hui says that it would be stupid of him to reveal what he is thinking about right now. The main character leans his hand on the table, looking at the paper in front of him. He asks what he can teach the children if he can't even use mana. Woo Hui says that if it's just about how to fight, then the best candidate to be a teacher would be Hong Seok-young. The man smiles widely, closing his eyes. He says that it is easy to teach to fight, but the problem is magic. The dark man opens his eyes, looking decisively at the main character. He talks about the runes hiding Woo Hui's mana. Hong Seok-young asks if the main character made them himself. The guy with dark hair silently looks ahead, frowning. He mentally notes that this is why he should have remained silent. Hong Seok-young places his hands in front of him on the table. The main character straightens up. He asks if the man wants him to teach the children runes. Hong Seok-young says it doesn't matter whether Woo Hui made them himself or not, but he just needs to know about the other runes. The main character puts his feet on the floor. On one of them there is a bracelet like a handcuff. He says he thought he would teach children how to go into dungeons. Woo Hui says it would be suspicious if an illegal awakened who recently escaped from an isolated criminal organization knew much about it. The main character throws his hand forward, protesting that runes are magic. Hong Seok-young puts his hand to his head with a smile and states that they can be very useful for children. Woo Hui says he is not the right person to teach. Hong Seok-young counters that the guy is an ideal teacher. The main character looks away thoughtfully. He thinks whether he should say that he made such runes and patent them. He dismisses the idea. Wu Hui lifts his head up, shifting his gaze. The main character says that even if he patents them, they will save many lives if he spreads knowledge about them. He will not be able to find and save every hunter personally, so the best solution would be to tell the public about the runes. Hong Seok-young laughs and holds out his hand with a pen in it. He says Wu Hui will still do it. The guy with dark hair clicks the button on the handle and irritably agrees, saying that it's all for the sake of the children. The main character looks at a piece of paper, signing an agreement. Hong Seok-young says he took care of the certified copies and bank account and will give them back later. The dark man explains that he called it a school, but it is run with his own money, so the main character will be listed as a member of the guild. He goes on to explain that since Wu Hui doesn't raid dungeons, he has no other incentive, so Hong Seok-young simply determined his monthly salary based on the minimum wage. The main character squeezes the piece of paper in his hands with displeasure and surprise at this news. The dark man smiles, revealing his strong teeth. He says that the guy will receive only 90% of this amount during the 3-month probationary period. The man also explains that they have less than 5 people, so the situation with vacations is difficult. The main character squeezes a piece of paper in his hands, rolling it into a tube, and frowns. Hong Seok-young continues to explain that they still take days off on holidays, and their children sometimes call them to practice even on these days. But Wu Hui will decide whether to go or not. The guy says he was deceived. 2 days pass. Cars drive along a city road. In the white long car, Hong Seok-young says that Wu Hui's sword is good. A dark man holds the steering wheel with his hands and looks through the mirror at the main character. He says the sword recognizes its owner and sends enemies straight to the hospital. Hong Seok-young wonders if the sword belongs to Wu Hui. The guy with dark hair says the sword belongs to someone he knows, and the agency director wonders if he stole the weapon. The main character puts his hand on his knee and says that in that case he would also burn. In his mind, Wu Hui reasons that he used to hate this sword, but apparently now he knows that Yu Jiyoung gave it to the main character before her death. A guy with dark hair looks carefully into the windshield. Hong Seok-young asks if Wu Hui is angry because the man didn't return his sword. The protagonist explains that even if the dark man returned the weapon to him, he would not be able to use it due to the mana-limiting device. Hong Seok-young smiles widely as he drives the car and says that Wu Hui is still angry at him. The main character denies this. He looks at the agency director, whose face breaks into a smile. The man says that their school doesn't allow blades, so he won't be able to use a sword either. Hong Seok-young adds that their classes don't really require weapons. The guy with dark hair says that a man can simply say that he doesn't want a suspicious person with a gun near his students. The main character puts his hand on the car door and looks at the city. Hong Seok-young asks why Wu Hui is so pessimistic. Suddenly the guy flinches, raising his hand. He sees spikelets and trees outside the car window. The main character says that the school's surroundings were as urban as they could get, but not as rural. The guy wonders if Hong Seok-young is taking him to the right place. The agency director slaps his hand on Wu Hui's chest. He says with a smile that this is all because there are dungeons nearby, and that this is an ideal place to raise hunters. The car stops and parks on the road. The man says they have arrived. The characters get out of the car. The main character looks at 3-block buildings and asks if this is really a school. Hong Seok-young says that everything looks a little sloppy. The dark man looks into the distance with a smile and says that they will build the building next year, so this state of affairs is temporary. The main character thinks that this is not careless, but there is nothing at all. Wu Hui points his finger ahead gloomily and asks if he will have to study here until next year. Hong Seok-young says with a bright smile that the path to the top has to start somewhere. The man clenches his hand into a fist and smiles widely, closing his eyes. He welcomes Wu Hui to Hunter High School. The main character finds himself in front of the class. He puts one hand in his pocket. Hong Seok-young introduces him to the class and says that Wu Hui will be teaching runes. He says that he knows that some of them have seen him before, and asks not to be too rude to the main character. Lee Seon-young raises his hand high and addresses the teacher. Hyun-wook also raises his palm. He asks if the man used a sword instead of magic. Hong Seok-young stands in front of the students while the guy with glasses and Lee Seon-young raise their hands. The dark man says that you don't have to be a magician to use runes and that it was hard to convince Wu Hui to become a teacher. The guy with glasses wonders if they will study runes that hide mana or new ones. Hong Seok-young places his hands on his hips and looks at his student with a smile. He says that they will study new runes and that this material should be very useful for the guy with glasses and Wu Hui himself, so he asks not to fall asleep during the main character's lessons. The student says it sounds great, but asks if it's okay for Woo Hui to teach them this. Hong Seok-young asks if the main character would teach them if it wasn't good. He asks if the students want to learn runes. The guy with the glasses agrees with a beaming smile. A girl with pink hair pulled back into a ponytail leans slightly from her desk and asks if only magicians can participate in this lesson. Hong Seok-young looks at the girl carefully, smiling widely, and reports that this is not so. It's just that the guy with glasses and the main character are the only ones who know how to draw runes. The principal says that the school is flexible, so the girl can join the lessons if she wants. Lee Sun-young, a guy with short hair and big eyes, raises his fist in the air. He asks if the teacher was hurt after that incident. The guy pulls his hand forward, leaning his body on the desk. The girl with dark hair behind says that she was very worried about the teacher. The girl with short hair also confirms her words. The main character raises his head in surprise, becoming serious. He listens as Lee Sung-yeon explains that they asked both the director and other people about him, but no one said anything about the fate of the main character. The girl with short hair says that they were worried that something bad had happened to Woo Hui. The guy with the glasses asks if the guy with dark hair is sure he's okay. The main character presses his hand to his chest with a satisfied smile. He compares the students to kind and innocent little ducklings. The guy says they are different from the hunters they will become in 20 years. The main character quotes the words that if a person dies, it will be his fault, and what he leaves behind will belong to the world. But if he lives, it will be only thanks to higher powers, so everything that a person earns will be belong to others. This was the attitude of the whole world. The main character looks around and thinks that the person who was stabbed in the back by a squad member in the dungeon and who ended up dying is one of the students. Woo Hui frowns sharply, pursing his lips and looking at something. He sees a girl with dark hair biting her nails, her face grim. The main character wonders what happened to this girl, Park Seo-yeon. Woo Hui remembers that she looked normal the last time he saw her. The main character thinks that only 10 days have passed since the incident in Myeongdong. He doesn't understand how the girl became the witch Park Seo-yeon he knows. The action moves to April 5, 2024 in the Myeongdong dungeon. The mark on the forehead of a guy with short blonde hair glows blue. Someone asks Park Seo-yeon to look at the rune the speaker drew. A girl with dark hair points her finger at Hyunwook's forehead, saying that the line here shouldn't be that long. The guy with the glasses agrees. Confused, he says it's so difficult, but Park Seo-yeon made it so easy. A girl with dark hair smiles pleasantly, tilting her head. She says her grandfather taught her when she was little. Park Seo-yeon turns his head to the guy with the glasses and asks him to draw Hyunwook's mark, and she will draw Lee Sun-yeon's mark. The guy asks if she's tired and says he can handle it himself. Park Seo-yeon closes her eyes with a calm smile and says that she has more experience as a magician than the guy with glasses, so he shouldn't overwork himself. The girl adds that they will still need his shield. A dark voice tells her that arrogance ruins everything. A guy with short hair wipes away his tears. Someone says that the rune didn't work on him. Park Seo-yeon clasps his hands with a pitiful and guilty face. A voice in her head repeats that arrogance ruins everything. Lee Sun-yeon tries to reassure her that everything is fine and that everyone got out safely thanks to her. Park Seo-yeon bites her finger until it bleeds, her hair disheveled. The action moves to 2044 to an ability management agency. Park Seo-yeon, disheveled and wearing a long skirt, enters the building and giggles as two guys notice her. They quickly leave, one tapping the other on the shoulder. Hyunwook, a mature and plump man with short hair, appears, looking down at the girl and asking what Park Seo-yeon is doing. The girl with dark hair lowers her head, smiling grimly. She greets the guy, who asks if she is waiting for Hong Seok-yeon. The main character squeezes behind Hyunwook. Park Seo-yeon says that he is not waiting for the director. The guy with dark hair brushes off his jacket and says that he didn't call the characters here to chat. Hyunwook asks who he is. The main character stands in front of them while Park Seo-yeon and the chubby guy look at him. Woo Hui introduces himself as an assistant from the Joint Dungeon Raid headquarters. Hyunwook frowns in disbelief and tilts his face towards the guy with dark hair. He asks where he is from. The protagonist explains that his job is to support the agency director and evaluate the security of all existing dungeons in South Korea, as well as supporting the hunters in their missions to raid the dungeons safely. Hyunwook asks what kind of nonsense he is talking about. Woo Hui closes his eyes with an awkward smile. He briefly explains that he works in the office of the agency director. The action is transferred to the current moment. A guy with dark hair sits on the bed while Hong Seok-yeon steps aside. The man asks him to stay at the hotel and warns him that he also lives here, so he tells him not to complain. The main character says that he is glad that he does not have to live in a container. Hong Seok-young closes the door with a smile and bids Woo Hui goodnight. The main character crosses his legs and touches the bracelet on his leg. The guy says that when he was young, he wondered why they had to study these things. Woo Hui easily removes the bracelet from his ankle. He uses the watch on his wrist and looks at the system window with a smile. The main character says that the director was right and he should understand technology. The guy moves his fingers across the virtual screen, pressing all sorts of buttons. He wonders what he should pay attention to first. The main character goes through the options, the history of the group that caught Hong Seok-yeon, records about Kim that may be here. Woo Hui removes his hands from the screen, curling his fingers. He starts typing Park So-eun into the search engine. The main character carefully studies the information that the watch tells him, controlling the screen with his fingers. He says he knows about all this, but wants to know what exactly changed the girl's personality. The main character suddenly breaks into a smile. He comes across information on a website. The system window says that Hunter Park So-eun's personal information has been provided. Last modified date, 2041-0110. The site warns that the state is not responsible for the consequences of violating these rules, and if a person breaks these rules, then nothing threatens his life, but he may experience something unusual. The main character says that the format is not the same. He reads the following information about not praising Park So-eun's magic. The main character remembers the face of a curly, disheveled girl. He thinks about how the girl smiled every time he clapped for her. He then reads that if Park So-eun doesn't smile, then he needs to move away because he could be in danger. In case of emergency, you need to call the names Yoo Ji-yeon or Hyun-wook. Also, you can't mention Myeongdong. The main character moves his fingers across the screen. His hands freeze in front of him. Woo Hui thinks the Myeongdong incident changed her personality. He says he heard there were no bodies intact at the time, so that makes sense. The main character throws up his hands, with a contrite face, reasoning that this time he saved everyone. Woo Hui doesn't understand what the problem is. The guy is checking his watch with his head down. He notices something and raises his eyebrows. He sees that the author is Hong Seok-yeon. On the system window it is written about the Research Center River of Promises of the Ark, and the date is indicated 2025-0601. The day passes. Spikelets of field grass can be seen on the shore of the lake. The main character stands nearby, with his hands in the pockets of his sports uniform. He thinks that Hong Seok-yeon brought him here early in the morning, but he didn't show up. Lee Sun-yeon runs up to Woo Hui. The main character looks ahead thoughtfully while a guy with short hair tries to attract his attention. Woo Hui reasons that there really is nothing nearby. The main character closes his eyes and frowns with displeasure. He says he can't believe they need to develop this place and build a new building here. He thinks about just giving up, since there are only 20 years left and he could use his knowledge of the future to live in luxury. The main character opens his eyes, looking decisively forward, and says that he needs this to survive. He blames Yoo Ji-yeon for everything. Lee Sun-yeon spreads his arms and calls out loudly for the teacher, making Woo Hui flinch. The main character leans over, examining the student from the side. Lee Sun-yeon asks what he's been thinking about for so long. The main character calls him by name. The boy's face shines with a smile. He is glad that Woo Hui remembers him. The guy with dark hair looks away while the student wonders where his sword is. Lee Sun-yeon says his aunt became so interested when she heard about the gun. The boy explains that his aunt also uses a sword. A shaggy girl appears behind the guy in uniform. The main character listens to Lee Sun-yeon say that her aunt is a famous hunter. Woo Hui says that his aunt is the youngest daughter of the chairman of the Daeung Group and the guild master of the Daseung Guild, Lee Mason. An image of a blonde woman with her hair in a ponytail appears and waves her hand. The girl is a hunter with a powerful biography and remarkable skills. The main character says that Lee Mason adored Lee Sun-yeon so his future can be secured. The boy clenches his hands into fists and resolutely declares that his aunt wants to meet Woo Hui. Hong Seok-yeon calls out to the main character, and he reluctantly turns his gaze towards the dark-skinned man, reasoning that he had a great chance. Hong Seok-yeon calls him to come to him. The main character enters a warehouse where there are cardboard boxes all around. Hong Seok-yeon smiles and says that he has prepared an office for the guy. A man picks up a box while a guy with dark hair looks at a red sleeping mask. Hong Seok-yeon explains that they use this room as a storage area, and tells the main character not to worry as he will clean everything up later. Woo Hui mentally says that a man will never take all this away. The guy with dark hair exhales tensely and closes his eyes, frowning. He looks out the window. Hong Seok-yeon turns his gaze there, rising to his full height. The main character asks him to do something with Park Seo-yeon. The director asks what exactly. The girl with dark hair and a long skirt hugs her knees with her arms while sitting against the wall of a building on the grass. The main character says that the girl looks completely different from when Woo Hui saw her in Myeongdal. Hong Seok-yeon agrees with his colleague and says that Park Seo-yeon's style has suddenly changed a lot. The main character looks gloomily at the self-confidently smiling agency director, who stands with his hands folded on his chest. The main character thinks that the problem is not only in the girl's style. The dark man states that every hunter hits a wall at some point, and Park Seo-yeon has long since awakened, so her time has come. The main character moves his head to the side, exhaling intensely while Hong Seok-yeon smiles. He asks what happened to Woo Hui and if he's worried about his classes. The main character sees a dark man smiling brightly and bending his arm at the elbow, showing off his muscles. He is ready to help with any problem. Woo Hui says that the agency director is hopeless because he is too confident in himself both mentally and physically. The main character imagines himself in space, surrounded by stars and planets, one of which smiles like Hong Seok-yeon. The guy says that the problems of normal people or the fact that someone cannot get up after being knocked down is incomprehensible to the director of the agency. A window is visible, soft light oozes through the glass. Modern dungeon strategy is divided into before and after rune revaluation. Runes had long been neglected due to several fatal flaws, but after a magician from France discovered the mana concealment rune, everything changed. A glowing symbol appears on a blue background. Despite the shortcomings, all magicians studied runes, and by about 2040 everyone began to draw them. Even pens for mana were created. The main character closes his eyes and smiles tensely. He thinks that at this moment runes should be owned exclusively by magicians. Woo Hui talks about creating a way to obtain mana. The main character stands in front of a whiteboard. In front of him are Park Seo-yeon and a guy with glasses at their desks, and behind him are other students on chairs. Hong Seok-yeon sits with his legs crossed and asks why the main character was silent. The girl with short hair waves her hand and says that they will also be silent. The main character thinks why they came to the rune class if they can't even use them. A guy with dark hair raises his hand, smiling, his eyes closed. He says the students did a lot of work on runes. Woo Hui offers to assess their level. The main character turns to Choi Jinwoo. The guy draws a line on paper with an orange pencil. A guy with dark hair stands grimly over a guy with glasses who is shaking all over. The main character says that Choi Jinwoo ruined everything again. The guy with glasses asks if the runes are not activated without problems even with such an error. The main character says that of course it will activate. Woo Hui picks up a piece of paper with scribbles on it and asks if Choi Jinwoo knows why runes weren't used in the past. The guy with glasses suggests that it was because it was more convenient to use magic. The main character asks why this is so. Choi Jinwoo clutches his head, lowering his face pitifully. The guy with dark hair thinks that not even a year has passed since he woke up, so it was a difficult question. The main character turns to Park Seo-yeon, who is sitting behind. She chews a pencil with her teeth, tearing off a whole piece while her face is gloomily tilted. Woo Hui winces, pressing his palms together, and sees a girl with disheveled hair turn to him. The main character wonders why no one thinks this is weird, and then asks if it's normal, but he himself is weird. Woo Hui asks her to answer why runes are not used more often. Park Seo-yeon tilts her face, trying to say something, and pieces of pencil fall out of her mouth. The guy with dark hair shudders in fear. He does not understand how what is happening can be connected with her style, and says that the girl has gone crazy. Park Seo-yeon gives the answer that it is because the runes are easily erased. The main character turns to face the whiteboard, opening a black marker and drawing something. He says this is the correct answer. The guy with dark hair adds that this is especially true in dungeons, where the mana in the air is distorted. The main character asks how to compensate for this. Woo Hui draws a blue line with a marker. He says that for the student's information, he is not a magician, so there is no point in asking him about the principle of operation. You just need to remember all this. The bespectacled guy looks ahead in surprise while Park Seo-yeon gloomily chews on his pencil. The main character talks about strength, correction, water resistance, amplification, and resonance. Several symbols are visible, superimposed on each other. Choi Jinwoo asks in surprise how they can remember all this. The main character says that this is a combination that prevents runes from being easily erased, and if the first rune drawn is even slightly wrong, It will not activate, so you have to be precise at all times. Wu Hui notices the girl holding out her hand. He asks why the teacher didn't teach them this in Myeongdong. A smile disappears from Wu Hui's face. Park Seo-yeon smiles pitifully and looks away. She says she drew the runes incorrectly, which is why they didn't activate. Even if she knew this, in her opinion, it would be pointless. The main character realizes that Park Seo-yeon is in this state now because he weakened Lee Sun-yeon's runes. Sheets covered with incorrect runes fall to the floor. Being a hunter is a struggle with yourself. Victory or defeat in this battle is everyone's business. Moreover, even in such a terrible state after the Myeongdong incident, Park Seo-yeon became an archmage. So technically it's not the protagonist's fault and he could easily ignore it. Wu Hui sees the girl holding out the paper with a crazy and pitiful smile. Park Seo-yeon says she drew it again and it must be right this time. She asks if she did it right. Her face darkens, her smile grows smaller, and she wonders if she's screwed everything up again. Tears appear in her eyes. Park Seo-yeon says that she can't ruin anything. She repeats this phrase over and over again, like crazy. The main character claps his hands. The girl clutches the paper in her hands. Everyone looks at Wu Hui. A guy with dark hair smiles and looks at the students, inviting them to eat since it is already lunchtime. The main character reasons that it may not be his fault, but as an adult and a teacher, it is his responsibility.